The year was 2187. Humans now lived on many planets and space stations. The biggest station was called Harmony. It floated in space like a giant wheel, turning slowly to make gravity for the people who lived there. Jung Kim was 17 years old. His skin was dark brown, and his eyes were bright and quick. Every morning, he rode the transit shuttle to his job training. Jun was learning to be an engineer. He was very good with machines and computers. Jun's parents were scientists who studied alien life. 5 years ago, they'd moved from Earth to Station Harmony for better jobs. They hoped Jun would have a better life here too. But life on Harmony wasn't always easy. Some humans still judged others by their skin color. Some aliens looked down on all humans. Jun was smart, but he often felt alone. "Transit Shuttle 47 departing in 2 minutes," said the computer voice. Jun hurried to the platform. He had stayed up all night studying for his engineering test. His eyes felt heavy, but he couldn't be late again. The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss. People pushed inside, both humans and aliens. Jun squeezed into the crowded car and found a single empty seat near the back. He sat down with a sigh of relief. The shuttle started moving. It glided along the curved track that ran around the station's ring. Through the windows, Jun could see the center of Harmony where ships docked. The view still amazed him after 5 years. At the next stop, more people got on. Among them was an old woman with white hair and pale skin. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a small bag. The woman looked around 80 years old, and she held onto a handrail as the shuttle started moving again. The shuttle turned sharply to switch tracks. The gravity shifted, and everyone leaned to one side. The old woman stumbled. Her face showed pain as she tried to stay standing. Jun watched her struggle. He was tired. His test was in 2 hours. The seat felt good after standing in his family's small apartment all night to let his parents sleep. But the old woman almost fell again when the shuttle shook. Jun stood up. "Excuse me," he said. "Would you like to sit down?" The woman looked at him with surprise. Her blue eyes widened slightly. "That's very kind of you, young man," she said. Her voice was soft but clear. Jun moved aside, and the woman sat down carefully. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him. "These old bones don't handle the turns very well anymore." "No problem," Jun said. He held onto the ceiling rail as the shuttle continued its journey. The woman introduced herself. "I'm Sun Park," she said. "I'm Jung Kim," he replied. "Are you heading to school, Jun?" she asked. "Engineering apprenticeship," he explained. "I'm learning to fix the station's environmental systems. A very important job." Mrs. Park nodded. "Without those systems, we'd all be in trouble." Jun smiled. Most people didn't think much about the air filters and water recyclers that kept everyone alive. They talked a little more. Mrs. Park asked about his studies. She seemed interested in his answers. Most adults didn't talk to Jun like this. When the shuttle announced Alpha Section, Mrs. Park prepared to leave. Alpha was the richest part of the station. Important people lived there. "This is my stop," she said. "Thank you again for the seat, Jung Kim. Small kindnesses make life worth living." The shuttle doors opened, and Mrs. Park stepped out into the clean, bright hallway of Alpha Section. Jun watched her go. Then the doors closed, and the shuttle moved on. Jun almost forgot about the meeting by the end of the day. His test had been hard, but he thought he did well. His supervisor had praised his work on fixing a broken air filter. It was a good day. The next morning, when Jun arrived at the transit platform, the station manager called his name. "Jung Kim, this came for you." The manager handed him something strange. It was a small paper envelope. Real paper was rare and expensive. Inside was a card made of thick, cream-colored paper. On it, someone had written with blue ink, "Dear Jung Kim, thank you again for your kindness yesterday. In a world of screens and digital messages, I thought a handwritten note might stand out. If you are not busy, I would be honored if you would join me for tea tomorrow at 16 o'clock. My address is Residence 7, Level 3, Alpha Section asterisk. Asterisk with appreciation, asterisk. Asterisk Sun Park asterisk. Asterisk P.S. The security system will recognize your name asterisk. June read the note twice. Alpha Section. That was where the station leaders and rich people lived. Why would the old woman invite him there? That night at dinner, Jun showed the note to his parents. His father raised his eyebrows. Alpha Section. That's unusual. His mother looked concerned. You don't know this woman, June. I met her on the shuttle. She seemed nice. June pushed his food around his plate. I just gave her my seat. That was kind of you, his mother said. But be careful. Some people in Alpha don't like people from Beta Section coming up there. Beta Section was where most working families lived. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't fancy like Alpha. She invited me, Jun said. That means she wants me to come, right? His father nodded slowly. I suppose so, but don't stay too long, and call us if anything seems wrong. The next day after his apprenticeship, Jun cleaned up and put on his best clothes. He took the shuttle to Alpha Section and felt out of place immediately. The hallways in Alpha were wider. The lights were brighter. Plants grew in large pots along the walls. It smelled different too, like flowers and clean air. June found Residence 7 and stood at the door. A small screen lit up. June Kim, he said, feeling nervous. The screen flashed green. Welcome, Mr. Kim. Mrs. Park is expecting you. The door slid open silently. Inside was the most beautiful home Jun had ever seen. The ceiling was high. One wall was a giant window looking out into space. Stars shined bright against the blackness. Plants grew everywhere in glass containers. Ah, you came. Mrs. Park appeared from another room. She walked slowly but smiled warmly. I'm so glad. Thank you for inviting me, Jun said. He stood stiffly, unsure what to do. Please, sit down. Mrs. Park pointed to a comfortable chair. The tea is almost ready. June sat and looked around. The room had real wooden furniture. On the walls hung paintings of Earth landscapes and strange alien worlds. Glass cases held objects that looked ancient and valuable. Mrs. Park brought a tray with a teapot and 2 cups. The cups looked very old and delicate. These cups are from Earth, she said, seeing him look at them. They're over 400 years old. My husband collected antiques. She poured the tea carefully. It was green and smelled like plants and sunshine. You must be wondering why I invited you here, Mrs. Park said. June nodded. Yes, Mom. First, because I wanted to thank you properly. Simple kindness is rare these days. She sipped her tea. And second, because you remind me of someone. Who? June asked. Mrs. Park smiled. My husband when he was young. He had the same look in his eyes, curious and kind at the same time. What did your husband do? June asked, taking a small sip of tea. It tasted better than any tea he'd had before. Mrs. Park's eyes sparkled. His name was Han Park. Admiral Han Park. June almost dropped his cup. Everyone knew that name. Admiral Park was famous. He was the first human to speak with the Ardari, the powerful alien race that helped humans build the stations and travel between stars. Your husband was the Admiral Park. Jun's voice came out as a whisper. Mrs. Park nodded. Yes. He died 10 years ago. But his work lives on in the peace between humans and Ardari. June couldn't believe he was sitting in Admiral Park's home, drinking tea with his widow. This was the man who changed human history. His picture was in all the history books. I don't understand, Jun said finally. Why share this with me? I just offered you a seat. Mrs. Park set down her cup. Sometimes, Jun Kim, the smallest actions show the true nature of a person. My husband believed that. The Ardari believed that too. She leaned forward slightly. And I have a story to tell you. A true story about humanity's future among the stars. A story that might change your life, if you're willing to listen. She stood up and walked to a bookshelf. From it, she took an old-fashioned book with a leather cover. "This is Hans' journal," she said. "What's written here has never been made public, but I think you should see it." As Mrs. Park opened the journal, John felt like his whole life was about to change. And he was right. Mrs. Park opened the leather journal carefully. The pages were yellow with age. June leaned forward in his chair. His heart beat fast. "Before I show you this," Mrs. Park said, "I need to explain something. What you know about the Ardari and our first contact with them is not the whole truth." June frowned. Everyone knew the story. The Ardari, tall aliens with blue skin, had found Earth ships exploring near their space. Instead of fighting, they offered friendship and shared their advanced technology. That was 30 years ago. Now humans and Ardari work together on many planets and stations. The history books tell a simple story, Mrs. Park continued. But the truth is more complex. The Ardari almost decided to limit human expansion. Limit it? How? June asked. They planned to keep us on Earth and a few nearby planets. They would watch us and control our growth, like a protected animal park. June felt cold. They thought we were animals. Not animals exactly, but dangerous, primitive. Mrs. Park turned a page in the journal. The Ardari have lived in peace for thousands of years. When they studied our history and saw all our wars, they were afraid. She handed June the journal. The handwriting was neat and small. June read. *Day 87 of First Contact Mission *. The Ardari Council has concerns about human expansion. They've been watching our broadcasts for 50 years before making contact. They've seen our wars, our hatred, our division by race and nation. Chief Counselor Zell told me today they fear we will bring these problems to the stars. They are considering restricting us to our solar system for further observation. This would end our dreams of joining galactic society as equals *. June looked up. But they didn't restrict us. We have ships and stations everywhere now. Mrs. Park nodded. Something changed their minds. Keep reading. June turned the page. *Day 93 *. A breakthrough. The Ardari use observation drones to study other species. For years, they'd been watching humans in secret. Today, Counselor Zell showed me their footage. They have thousands of recordings of humans being cruel to each other. Wars, fights, hate. But they also have recordings of small kindnesses. A man helping a stranger who fell. A child sharing food with another child who looks different. A woman giving her coat to someone homeless. Zell said these small acts confused them. How could the same species be so violent yet so kind? Especially to those who look different or have nothing to give back. I explained that this is the essence of humanity. We can be terrible, yes, but we can also be good for no reason except that it feels right. We can grow and learn and become better. June's hands trembled as he read. He had never heard this part of the story. The Ardari are very logical, Mrs. Park explained. They couldn't understand why humans would help each other when there was no benefit. It made no sense to them. So what happened? June asked. They decided to test us. They gave my husband a challenge. June turned more pages and found the entry. Day 120 The council has made their decision. They will allow humans greater access to space on one condition. We must demonstrate that kindness is our true nature, not just rare exceptions. They've asked me to create the Human Advancement Initiative. On the surface, it will look like a program to share Ardari technology. But its real purpose is to track human progress in overcoming our divisions and hatred. The Ardari will be watching us. If we continue to grow more peaceful and united, they will consider us full partners. If we fall back into old patterns of division and hate, they may still limit our expansion asterisk. It's a huge responsibility. The future of humanity depends on our ability to be better than our past asterisk. June looked up from the journal. This is amazing. Nobody knows this. Only a few top officials, Mrs. Park said. The initiative still exists today. It monitors human progress and reports to the Ardari. She poured more tea for June. Her hands were wrinkled but steady. But why are you telling me this? June asked. I'm nobody important. Mrs. Park smiled. You remind me of Han. When the Ardari first met him, they didn't see an important admiral. They saw a human who was kind to others without thinking about it. She paused. Just like you were kind to me on the shuttle. June felt his face get warm. It was just a seat. It was more than that. You saw someone different from you who needed help, and you acted without hesitation. Mrs. Park set down her cup. The Ardari value that quality above all others. She stood up slowly and walked to a desk. From a drawer, she took an envelope made of shiny blue paper. It had strange symbols on it. The Ardari Council is meeting next month, she said. They will review the Human Advancement Initiative. They're concerned about recent events. What events? June asked. There have been fights between human groups on the outer planets. Some people want to keep the best Ardari technology for themselves. Others think we should break away from Ardari influence. Mrs. Park sighed. The old problems of human history aren't gone. They've just moved to new places. She handed June the blue envelope. This is a nomination for the Galactic Diplomatic Corps Academy. Only 100 humans are accepted each year. Most come from powerful families or have political connections. June stared at the envelope. The academy was famous. Its graduates became ambassadors to alien worlds and helped shape humanity's future in space. I can't. This isn't for someone like me, he said. I'm just an engineering apprentice. The Ardari don't care about your job or your family status, Mrs. Park said firmly. They care about character, about potential. You have both. June opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a formal letter with both human and Ardari writing. It invited him to take the academy entrance exam next month. I've already submitted your name, Mrs. Park said. My recommendation carries weight because of Han's position, but you'll have to pass the tests on your own. June read the letter twice. It seemed impossible. Yesterday he was just a normal teen from Beta Section. Today he was being offered a chance that most people only dreamed about. Why me? He asked again. You don't even know me. Mrs. Park sat down and looked at him seriously. The Ardari believe in something they call pattern recognition. They think small actions reveal big truths about a person's character. She touched the journal. When I saw you give up your seat, I recognized the pattern. You acted exactly as Han would have done, without thinking about rewards or recognition, just because it was right. She leaned closer. The diplomatic corps needs people like you, June. People who naturally bridge differences. The Ardari are watching humanity closely right now. They're trying to decide if we deserve our place among the stars. June felt the weight of her words. It seemed too big for him. He was just a regular teen who liked to fix machines. I don't know if I can do this, he said honestly. You don't have to decide now, Mrs. Park said gently. The exam is in 4 weeks. Think about it. She took a small device from her pocket and handed it to him. It looked like a simple wristband. This contains study materials about the Ardari and other species. It will help you prepare if you choose to take the exam. June put the band on his wrist. It lit up with a soft blue glow. There's one more thing you should know, Mrs. Park said. Her voice became serious. If you enter the academy, your life will change forever. You'll learn secrets about humanity's place in the galaxy. Some of those secrets are wonderful. Others are frightening. She looked straight into his eyes. And you'll be watched, not just by humans, but by the Ardari too. They'll judge our species partly by your actions. June swallowed hard. This was so much bigger than offering a seat on a shuttle. I'll think about it, he promised. When it was time to leave, Mrs. Park walked him to the door. She moved slowly but with dignity. Whatever you decide, Jung Kim, remember this. In a universe full of different beings, kindness is the one language everyone understands. As June rode the shuttle back to Beta section, he looked at the blue envelope and the wristband. His simple act of kindness had opened a door he never knew existed. The stars outside the station seemed brighter somehow, and among them, watching and waiting, were the Ardari, judging whether humans deserved to walk among those stars as equals. June made his decision before he reached home. He would take the exam. He would try to enter the academy. After all, how hard could it be? He would soon find out. 6 months passed quickly. June now wore the blue uniform of a first-year cadet at the Galactic Diplomatic Corps Academy. The academy was on the top level of Station Harmony, with huge windows that showed the stars and the curve of the nearby planet. June had passed the entrance exam. It wasn't easy. There were tests on history, language, science, and psychology. The hardest part was the interview with 3 stern-faced humans and 1 silent Ardari observer. Now, June stood in a large classroom with 30 other cadets. He was the youngest and the only one with dark skin. Most cadets came from wealthy families. They wore their uniforms like they had been born in them. June still felt strange in his. Director Du, the academy leader, walked to the front of the room. He was a tall man with gray hair and a serious face. "Welcome to your first day," Director Du said. "Look around you. These are your fellow cadets. Some of you will fail. Some will quit. Only the best will graduate and represent humanity to other species." June felt the other cadets looking at him. He heard whispers. How did he get in? Must be some kind of quota. Bet he won't last a month. June kept his eyes forward. Mrs. Park had warned him about this. Most academy spots went to people with connections. A boy from Beta section was unusual. After class, a cadet named Tai approached him. Tai was tall with perfect hair and clothes. His family owned 3 space stations. "You're Jung Kim, right?" Tai asked. "The charity case. I earned my place here," Jun said quietly. Tai laughed. "Really? No family connections, no political favors." "Mrs. Park recommended me," Jun said. Tai's eyes widened. "Mrs. Sun Park, Admiral Park's widow." June nodded. "How does someone like you know her?" Tai asked. June thought about explaining but decided not to. Todd wouldn't understand about the shuttle and the seat, about kindness with no reason. "We're friends," Jun said simply. The first weeks at the academy were hard. The classes were difficult. The other cadets mostly ignored Jun. He studied late every night, reading about alien customs and diplomatic history. The wristband Mrs. Park gave him helped. It contained more information than the academy library, especially about the Ardari. June learned about their 3-part language, their love of symmetry, and their strange sense of humor. Once a week, Jun visited Mrs. Park. They drank tea and talked about his classes. She helped him understand difficult concepts and told stories about Admiral Park's missions. But on his 8th visit, Mrs. Park wasn't well. "Just a little tired," she said, but her face was pale. She sat with a blanket over her legs even though the room was warm. "Should I call a doctor?" Jun asked. "No need. Dr. Jin was here this morning." Mrs. Park smiled weakly. "Just old age catching up with me." Jun didn't believe her. Something was wrong. The next day of the academy, Jun used the computer to research human illnesses. Nothing matched Mrs. Park's symptoms. On a hunch, he searched for Ardari artifacts and human illness. The computer showed a warning message. "Restricted information. Diplomatic clearance required." Joan tried another search. Radiation sickness. Pages of information appeared. The symptoms matched what he had seen in Mrs. Park. After class, Jun went to the Academy Medical Center. Dr. Jin worked there part-time. She was sorting medical supplies when Jun arrived. "Cadet Kim," she said, "what brings you here?" "Mrs. Park is sick," Jun said directly. "I think it's radiation from something Ardari." Dr. Jin's face became serious. She closed the door to the supply room. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "I guessed. Is it true?" Dr. Jin nodded. "She has an old Ardari artifact in her collection. We didn't know it was dangerous to humans. It emits a type of radiation our sensors don't detect." "Can you help her?" Jun asked. "There's a treatment, but—" Dr. Jin hesitated. "We need a special material from the Ardari homeworld. They used to share it freely, but recent tensions have changed things. The Ardari have become more careful with their resources." "Because of the problems on the outer planets?" Jun asked. "Yes. There are rumors that some humans want to take Ardari technology by force. The Ardari are worried." Dr. Jin sighed. "Politics should never interfere with medicine, but it does." Jun left the medical center feeling worried. Mrs. Park was sick because of an Ardari object, but Ardari materials could save her. It wasn't fair. The next day, Director Du made an announcement to all cadets. "Your final test will begin next week. You will work in teams to create a first contact plan for a newly discovered species. The species has technology similar to ours, but very different biology and culture. Your plan must establish peaceful relations and create a foundation for future cooperation." Everyone started talking at once. The first contact simulation was famous. Academy graduates talked about it for years afterward. It was the most important test. "One more thing," Director Du continued. "An observer from the Ardari Council will evaluate your work. Do not embarrass humanity." Jun was put in a team with 4 other cadets, including Ta. They met in a study room to plan. "We should show military strength first," Ta said. "Let them know we can defend ourselves." "That might seem threatening," another cadet argued. "We should offer trade agreements." "Technology exchange is better," said a third. "Show them what we can give them." They argued for hours. Jun mostly listened. He thought about Admiral Park's journal and the Ardari's confusion about human kindness. He thought about Mrs. Park, sick from an Ardari artifact, but still believing in cooperation between species. Finally, he spoke up. "I have a different idea." The others looked at him with surprise. Jun rarely talked in these meetings. "Instead of showing our strength or wealth, what if we show them our diversity? Our different cultures and backgrounds working together," Jun suggested. "That's not how first contact works," Ta scoffed. "You need to establish power or mutual benefit." "The Ardari weren't impressed by our power," Jun said quietly. "They were impressed by our capacity for kindness across differences." "How would you know that?" Ta demanded. Jun thought about the journal, about the secret history he couldn't share. "I just think different species might value different things," he said. "Maybe what makes us special isn't our technology or our resources. Maybe it's how we connect with each other despite our differences." The room was silent for a moment. "That's not a terrible idea," one cadet admitted. They worked through the night, creating a first contact plan unlike any before. Instead of military displays or trade proposals, they designed a cultural exchange. They would show the new species Earth music, art, food, and stories from different human cultures. They would demonstrate how humans could be different yet work together. When they presented their plan the next day, the other teams showed battle cruisers and trade ships. Jun's team showed a diverse group of human representatives sharing their cultures. Director Du's face revealed nothing as he watched, but in the back of the room, the Ardari observer leaned forward with interest. After all teams had presented, Director Du dismissed the class. As Jun was leaving, an aide handed him a message. "Report to medical center immediately." Jun's heart sank. It had to be about Mrs. Park. He ran all the way to the medical center. Dr. Jin was waiting. "Mrs. Park has taken a turn for the worse," she said. She's asking for you. June followed Dr. Jin to a private room. Mrs. Park lay in a bed, looking small and frail. Machines beeped softly around her. "June," she said when she saw him. Her voice was weak. "I'm sorry. I didn't tell you how bad it was." "Save your strength," June said, taking her hand. It felt cold. "Listen," Mrs. Park said. "The Ardari delegation, they're here for more than just Academy observation. They're deciding the future of human-Ardari relations." She coughed, and June gave her water. "Your first contact plan," she whispered. "It was perfect. You understand what's truly important." June felt tears in his eyes. "We need to get you the Ardari treatment." Mrs. Park closed her eyes. "Politics makes things difficult, but perhaps there's another way." "What way?" June asked. But Mrs. Park had fallen asleep, her breathing shallow. Dr. Jin touched June's shoulder. "She needs rest. Come back tomorrow." As June left the medical center, his mind raced. There had to be a way to help Mrs. Park, to get the Ardari material she needed. And then, as he passed the Academy reception area, he saw them, 3 tall, blue-skinned Ardari in formal robes, talking with Director Du. The Ardari delegation had arrived. And June had an idea. June watched the Ardari delegation from a distance. There were 3 of them. They were tall with blue skin that shimmered slightly in the light. Their eyes were large and dark. They wore long robes with patterns that seemed to move. June had never been this close to an Ardari before. Most humans hadn't. The aliens mostly kept to themselves, meeting only with top officials. Director Du was showing them around the academy. June followed quietly, staying out of sight. He needed to talk to them about Mrs. Park, but he wasn't sure how to approach them. That night, June couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Mrs. Park in the medical center, growing weaker, about the Ardari material that could save her, about the growing problems between humans and Ardari. In the morning, he checked his class schedule. His team's first contact simulation had received the highest score. As a reward, they would have lunch with the Ardari delegation today. June arrived at the small dining room early. He was nervous but determined. This might be his only chance to help Mrs. Park. The other cadets from his team arrived, followed by Director Du and the 3 Ardari. Everyone sat around a large table. "Cadets, this is Ambassador Rai of the Ardari Council," Director Du said. "Ambassador, these are our top cadets." The tallest Ardari nodded slightly. "Your simulation was unexpected," he said. His voice was deep and musical. "Most humans focus on power or trade in first contact scenarios." "That was Cadet Kim's idea," Ta said, surprising June. He suggested focusing on cultural diversity. Ambassador Ri turned to look at June. The Ardari's dark eyes seemed to see right through him. "Interesting," the ambassador said. "Why did you choose this approach, Cadet Kim?" June took a deep breath. "I believe what makes humans special isn't our technology or weapons. It's our ability to be different yet work together, to show kindness across boundaries." The ambassador tilted his head. "A rare perspective. How did you develop this view?" June thought quickly. This was his chance. "From Mrs. Sun Park," he said. "Admiral Park's widow. She's my mentor." The Ardari straightened. "Sun Park. We know this name. Admiral Park was respected among our people." "Mrs. Park is very sick," June said, ignoring Director Du's warning look. "She has radiation sickness from an old Ardari artifact in her home. She needs treatment with materials from your world." The room went silent. Director Du looked alarmed. The other cadets stared at June in shock. "Cadet Kim, this is not appropriate." Director Du began. "Let him speak," Ambassador Rai said, raising a long blue hand. "Continue, Cadet." "Dr. Jin says the treatment needs a special material from the Ardari homeworld," June said. "But because of the recent tensions, the material isn't being shared anymore." "This is true," the ambassador said. Recent events have made us cautious about sharing certain resources. I understand your concerns, June said, but Mrs. Park has dedicated her life to human Ardari friendship. She doesn't deserve to suffer because of politics. Director Du looked like he might explode. Cadet Kim, you are dismissed. Return to your quarters immediately. But June didn't move. With respect, sir, I can't do that. Not while Mrs. Park is dying, and we can help her. The ambassador studied June carefully. You care deeply for this human. Why? Because she believed in me when no one else did, June said. And because kindness should be returned with kindness. There was a long silence. Then the ambassador turned to the other Ardari and made musical sounds in their language. They talked for a minute. Then the ambassador turned back to June. There is another matter we must discuss, he said. Our intelligence reports indicate that a group of humans plans to steal advanced Ardari technology. They believe they can weaponize it. Director Du looked shocked. Ambassador, I assure you, the diplomatic corps would never. We know the corps is not involved, the ambassador said. But the threat is real. This is why we have restricted certain materials, including the one needed for Sun Park's treatment. June thought fast. Then let me prove that most humans still want peace. Let me join your mission to stop these people. Impossible, Director Du said. You're just a first-year cadet. But I'm the only one here who knows what's really at stake, June said. He looked at the ambassador, the Human Advancement Initiative. The real reason the Ardari allowed us into space. I know about it. The ambassador's eyes widened slightly. How do you know this? Mrs. Park showed me Admiral Park's journal, June said. I know the Ardari are still watching humans to see if we can overcome our divisions, to see if we deserve our place among the stars. The lunchroom was completely silent. The other cadets looked confused. Director Du looked stunned. This is true, the ambassador said finally. We are concerned about human progress. Recent events suggest you may be returning to old patterns of conflict and division. Not all of us, June said firmly. Please, let me show you. Help Mrs. Park, and I'll help you stop the people who want to steal your technology. The ambassador was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Very well. We will provide the material for Sun Park's treatment. He looked at Director Du. And we request that Cadet Kim join our mission as a human liaison. Director Du looked like he wanted to argue but knew better. As you wish, Ambassador. 3 days later, June stood in a small spacecraft approaching an unmarked station hidden in the asteroid belt. He wore a special suit that would hide his life signs from the station's sensors. With him were 2 Ardari security officers and Ambassador Ree. Remember the plan, the ambassador said. You will enter first, posing as a new recruit, find their central computer, and install our tracking device. Then leave immediately. The plan was dangerous but simple. The Ardari didn't want to arrest the humans. That would cause more tension. They just wanted to track their activities and know what technology they were targeting. June docked at the station and went through security. His fake identity worked. Inside, he found a group of about 30 humans working on various projects. They were from different stations and planets, but they all believed humans should be independent from the Ardari. The new guy's here, someone called out. A man named Hack greeted him. Welcome to Freedom Station. You're just in time. We're close to a breakthrough on the shield technology. June pretended to be impressed as Hack showed him around. He learned that the group planned to copy Ardari shield designs to build weapons that could penetrate Ardari defenses. When Hack left him alone at a computer station, June quickly installed the tracking device. It would let the Ardari monitor all communications and research. What are you doing? A voice asked behind him. June turned to see a young woman watching him. Just checking the system, he said, trying to sound calm. She looked suspicious. I don't think so. Security. June had to run. Alarms sounded as he raced for the docking bay. 2 men chased him. One caught his arm, but June broke free. He reached the ship just as station security arrived. Laser fire hit the hull as they pulled away. Mission accomplished, June told the ambassador, showing him the data they had collected. We know what they're planning now. The ambassador nodded. You have done well, Cadet Kim. This information will help us protect our technology without escalating tensions. When they returned to Station Harmony, June went straight to the medical center. Mrs. Park was sitting up in bed, looking much better. The Ardari treatment was working. June, she said with a smile, the doctors told me what you did, how you convinced the Ardari to help. I had to, June said. You gave me a chance. I couldn't let you down. You did more than that, Mrs. Park said. Ambassador Rai told me about your mission, about how you helped avoid a major problem between our species. June sat beside her bed. I just did what was right. That's what makes you special, Mrs. Park said. And that's why the ambassador has requested that you join the diplomatic mission to the Ardari homeworld next month. June's mouth fell open. What? But I'm still a cadet who understands what truly matters, Mrs. Park said. The Ardari were impressed by you, June, by your willingness to help others regardless of differences, by your courage and honesty. 6 months later, June stood on the surface of the Ardari homeworld. The sky was purple, and strange plants grew everywhere. The air smelled like cinnamon. Behind him stood Mrs. Park, fully recovered, and a delegation of human diplomats. In front of him, the Ardari Grand Council waited in a beautiful crystal building. As the youngest member of the human diplomatic team, June was nervous. But he remembered how this all started, with a simple act of kindness on a crowded shuttle. Welcome to Ardari Prime, the chief counselor said. We are pleased to renew our alliance with humanity. The new agreement was better than before. It included more technology sharing, cultural exchanges, and joint missions to explore the galaxy. Most importantly, it created the Human Ardari Friendship Program, which would send young people from both species to learn from each other. After the ceremony, Ambassador Ray approached June. The Council is impressed with your species' potential, he said. As Admiral Park once told us, small actions reveal big truths. June thought about how different his life was now from just 1 year ago, all because he offered his seat to an elderly woman on a shuttle. As if reading his mind, Mrs. Park joined them. Sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the smallest steps, she said. June looked up at the purple sky of this alien world. Somewhere out there, new species waited to be discovered. New friendships waited to be formed. And it all started with a simple act of kindness.